Hello, and welcome to Words from Yo Mama. I'm your host, Simone. If you're a mom or may be considering being a mom and you want some encouragement along the way, then this podcast is for you. On this podcast, I interview moms from every walk of life as they share their experiences. So thanks for listening. On this episode, we are going to be listening to Mama Bridgett. She's going to share some memories, some fun love stories, and life. Life as a mom to a few adult children, the ups, the downs, and everything in between. So thanks for listening. What guidance can you give thinking through sports, academics, and other activities? So for those parents out there who have kids in school or going through academics or other activities, what guidance could you give them?
Well, I would say don't try to keep up with the Joneses. There are some people who feel like their child has to be like this overachiever and in every sport that there is during that season. And it just gives them a very unrealistic expectation of their abilities because, stop and think, there's going to be plenty of time when they're an adult to run ragged and go nuts, having to work and having to do the stuff. If you're teaching them from a young age, okay, now you're here and now you're here and now you're here and they're exhausted by the time they hit the bed at night, you're exhausted. Mm-hmm. So are you really enjoying them? And they're exhausted. So you're teaching them unrealistic expectations of themselves and unrealistic time management. We had a rule in our house that, if you wanted to try something, it was one extracurricular per child at a time. So of course we had 4 kids, so that could be the potential to 4 different extracurriculars at one time. But it was the idea that, it showed them, if you're involved in this, give your best to this. Yeah. Don't feel like you have to spread yourself then in 12 different areas because you can't be, and really the bigger picture is you can't be all things to all people. You can't do all things all the time. Yeah. You have to know your limitations. Yeah. The other guidance I would say is, extracurriculars are great, but if they hinder coming to church, one rule for us is when Eric was in baseball or t-ball, it's like if it would affect a Wednesday night service, he couldn't be on that team. We had to find a team where practices and games were outside of that time frame, and they accommodated that. Nice. So it was available and it's there, but it goes back to, if you start teaching your children that this is optional and you can do sports over this, then you're creating this. It may seem innocent at the time, but how do you change that later on when it becomes something else or something bigger? What if it's all of a sudden it's, it's a job, and it's like, but God's not going to give you a job that's going to interfere with your ability to be able to be in the house of God. So good. I'm a firm believer. I have precedent for that even in my own life. When we first started coming to church, I worked as a nurse and, shift work, and I would be mostly evenings at that point. And I remember, when we started developing consistency, and it was like you didn't want to miss church because everything good happened on the night that you missed, Of course, yes. So when we started developing that consistency, there was a night I was scheduled to work, and I remember thinking, I don't want to miss work. I don't want to miss church. God, I really want to go to church. So I'm standing in the kitchen praying, God, I really don't want to go to work tonight. Please make a way that I can be off because I really want to come to church, and I really want to be in the house of God. And of course, 3 seconds into that prayer, my phone is ringing. And in my head, I'm thinking, will you just shut up? I'm trying to pray right now, okay? And so I was like, hold on a minute, God. So God, I went over and I answered the phone, and it was the hospital saying, hey, look, now, what they used to do is they'd say, will you be on call just in case we need you and you can come in? But not this night. They called and they said, look, we've got 7 people scheduled and there's literally nothing happening. So nice. Do you want to just be totally off and not have to worry about being on call at all? And I'm like, oh, yes, I do. And so So I don't believe God's going to create those events that are going to take you out of his presence. In fact, I think he wants you to be in his presence, and he wants you to be in fellowship with the body of Christ. So I think, for us to allow those mindsets in our children at a young age, now, of course, are there exceptions? Yes, there are exceptions. Every now and then there's going to be like a band concert you have no control over.
Yeah.
But to intentionally schedule something that is going to routinely take you away from the presence of God, away from something that's happening in church, I don't believe that that's God's will. And I think that as parents, if we teach our kids that that's okay, we're going to be dealing with bigger issues later on.
Yeah.
So, and I realize that it might sound harsh to some people, but I feel like it's part of that. We are in the world, but we're not of the world. And there is a place of separation. God doesn't want us to be, miserable while we're here. We can participate in those things. But if it's going to compromise anything about our relationship with him, then it's not from him.
Yeah. That's so good. That's so good. I remember my mom setting a line like that when I was 16 and I wanted to work. And I wanted to be a waitress at Outback because I knew they made big bucks. But again, they worked all the time. And they needed lots of people for night shifts. And I think we had Sunday night services then. And I remember I was like, I couldn't control whether I was going to be a bartender or a waitress. They didn't have the option. But I knew I was under 21, so I knew I wasn't going to be working in a bar. But there was a bar there. My mom's like, this is the line. It's going to conflict with church. It's ultimately going to conflict with your spirituality at one point because you're going to stay there for however long until you finish college. And I don't want you to do that. And then I ended up working at Chick-fil-A, and I think I stayed there for 4 years, and I cried the whole time because I'm like, I can't even make tips here. I can't even do anything. It's just a minimum wage job. It all ultimately worked out, but those lines and those boundaries are super important.
Yeah. Well, especially early on because you're sending messages that you don't even realize you're sending. I mean, kids are smart. The stuff that they take away from things, it'll blow your mind sometimes. I mean, it always kind of, teach Sunday school for a season. All of a sudden you realize, wow, these kids are so insightful. Because they'll just start sharing stuff that, by the way, again, another shameless plug, parents, pay attention to what you say at home because your kids are listening and the Sunday school teachers and the classes know about it. So anyway, but no, kids are smart. And so where you think it's just this healthy rounding of a foundation to give them these experiences, there's nothing wrong with giving them those experiences. But if you are compromising the house of God and a relationship with God, and you might say, oh, well, I'm not compromising anything. Church is Sunday. I mean, how many hours a week are there? I did this math one day. How many hours a week are there? I mean, between, 7 days a week, 7 times 24. Gosh, that's large math. Do the math. Is it 24 times 7? That's 168 hours a week, right? So out of 168 hours a week, we are here from, let's say, 10 o'clock to 2 o'clock on a Sunday, 4 hours. And we are here from 6:30 to 7:30 potentially on a Monday night. That's 5 hours. And then we're here from, let's just stretch it, 6 o'clock to, 9 o'clock on a Wednesday night.
Yeah.
So now we're up to 8 hours. How many hours does that leave us throughout the rest?
You still have 158.
158 hours. You're not sleeping for 158 hours.
No.
And you're not going to school or working for 158 hours. Deduct those, but still there's a lot of hours left in the week.
Yeah.
And there are other places to create those moments of well-roundedness for your children without compromising that time. You wouldn't look at your job and say, well, some people would, I don't know. But I mean, you know what I'm saying? There are things that should be non-negotiable. Yeah. And I feel like your relationship with God, whether it's your prayer time, your prayer closet, or church time, those are non-negotiables to me.
Amen. Amen.
Sorry, it's a candy stick.
No, you're fine. You're good.
Soapbox, whatever.
How do you balance commitments outside of the home with your family commitments? I know for you that's kind of difficult because, the lines get a little blurred because you work for the church. So, your church commitments kind of can go home.
Again, this is another place I'd like to say I wish I were better at it. I can say I was horrible at it when I worked at Dunkin' Donuts because there's just something in me that's like, it's this drive and it's not good. I mean, there is a good thing in wanting to serve and the good thing wanting to help other people, and it's good to have a great work ethic.
Yeah.
Work ethic is amazing. Have a good one.
For sure.
It'll take you far. But I think one challenge is that I have, and I know it's a problem for me, is boundaries.
Yes.
And being okay with saying to someone, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to help you with that.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it is in me. Part of me is like, oh yeah, that'll take 5 minutes. And it never takes 5 minutes.
Of course.
It's usually like 55 minutes maybe, but yes. So I think I would like to be better at that than I am. I'm definitely better now because I think working there helped me to realize our jobs, 2 seconds after we walk out the door, they'll tell you all day long, I'm going to use your name because you're sitting right in front of me. Simone, you are so invaluable. You're the most, I don't know what we would do without you. You are like the best worker we have. If you ever left, I just don't know what we would do. And so there's like this feeling internally like, wow, I'm really valuable to these people. Wow, I really make a difference here. And they couldn't operate without me. Of course, that's a certain level of pride too, you know? Mm-hmm. And I realized, you know, when I left the hospital, when I left Dunkin' Donuts, that job continued on.
Uh-huh.
And they operated and they found a way and they made it and it didn't fall apart and everything was good. Yep. And you know what? I am replaceable and that's okay. And so realizing that there's not a problem drawing boundaries. It's something I'm still learning because and maybe there's this people pleaser in me somewhere. I don't know if that's what I'd call it. I mean, on some levels, maybe, I don't know. But it's the idea that I just, you know, if it's in me to be able to do it and I think I can, I'm like, sure, why not? You know? But I think it, like you said, I honestly feel like on some level it's a little easier now that I'm working at the church because there's a certain flexibility because ministry here, you know, if I have to do something at 8:00 at night, I'll do something at 8:00 at night. But, you know, if I can come in a little bit later because there's the flexibility in it. It doesn't operate like you have to be here rigidly at this time or whatever. Yeah. And because we are all involved in ministry, there's a lot of times where like I'm sitting at my desk working and I look up and my husband walks through the door, you know, and so we'll have conversation then about, hey, what do you want to do tonight about this? Should we do this weekend? So some of that stuff just kind of naturally happens because we're all kind of in the same place with ministry. So balance, I can always get better with. Sometimes I feel like I'm way off balance, but I think it's definitely better now than it has been in the past.
Well, that's good. I know your whole family is just incredible worker bees. I remember when y'all started picking us up for youth class on Wednesday nights. Was it? Yeah, mm-hmm. Youth class on Wednesday nights at the annex, and you guys would pick me up super early, and I didn't understand why. And I was like, "Why are we going so early? Like church starts at 6:30, and we're like leaving at like 5:30. What's going on?" And Brett would put all the chairs in the rows, and he would organize the rows, pick up any tissues or anything that was left over. That was so unneeded and so unnecessary. And I'm sure it conflicted with some of your spaghetti time because you finish school, you're done, he's out from work, probably 5, and then y'all are on your way to come pick me up, which is like 15, 20 minutes out of the way, and then go back to church. Like, there's so many, I don't know, you guys are just incredible work ethic, just the whole family. Just the whole family.
Oh, well, again, it's a, what does Monk say? It's a blessing and a curse.
Yes. Okay, so our last 2 questions. What advice would you give your grandchild or grandchildren or great-grandchildren?
Wow. There's a whole lot you could say there.
Uh-huh. Let it flow.
Your mom is human. Your grandparents are human. They love you. They really do have your best interest at heart. It may not feel like it sometimes, but they do. If you just fall in love with Jesus and love Jesus with your whole heart, serve Jesus with everything that you have.
So, what is the most trouble you've ever gotten into?
The most trouble I've ever gotten into. Well, I was a good kid. Air quotes here. I was a good kid. Typically, I was the kid that, like, my mom and dad knew I was going to kind of fly pretty straight. I saw what other people did, and I was like, I don't like those consequences. I'm not going there. But when I was in junior high, there was a girl that drove us to school. She lived, like, on the next block over, and my mom would give her $5 for gas every week. Have I ever told you this story?
No.
Okay. And she would give us $5. No, this was a long time ago because it was $5 a week for gas. So she would give it to me, give me a $5 bill to give her every week to get gas. Well, one week I forgot to give it to her.
Oh, no.
And it was Monday, and it was in my purse, and I could have given it. She only drove me to school. I would ride the bus home. And I wanted to be like all my friends because at that point my mom was like, look, we can afford this and this, but we can't afford this, 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 and this. So it was like, if you bring your lunch, I can pay for her to take you to school, whatever. So lunch was $1. And how many days are there in a week, Simone?
5.
Yes. So I got to school that day and I knew I had that $5 bill in my purse. And I was like, I'm going to get a hamburger with my friends today. I'm going to look like everybody else. We're going to sit in the cafeteria and I'm going to just be like everybody else today.
Oh, no.
And so that's what we did. And then I had $4. So the next day rolls around and I was like, I don't have another $1 to add to this. I'm just not going to pay her today. So the next day but I still have $4. So I'm going to get lunch today in the cafeteria again. And okay, so do you see a pattern starting to form?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But where are the questions? Like your mom's like, why do you have lunch here?
She did not know because my mom wasn't there, so she didn't see that I wasn't eating my lunch. I was buying lunch. So fast forward, it was probably about 4 weeks. This poor girl didn't say anything to my mom for like 4 weeks.
Oh my gosh.
This was at the very beginning of caller ID on phones. And one day the phone rang and it was her. And she said, may I speak with your mom, please? And I knew what was coming. And so anyway, so she gets off. I'm like hiding, right?
Yeah.
And my mom gets off the phone with her and she's like, Bridgett Michelle, where are you? And I'm like, I'm here, Mom. And she said, do you know what that was about? And I said, I think I probably do. So she said, why? What happened? Why? What did you do with this money?
Yeah.
And I told her the whole deal. I was like, look, I was tired of not being like my friends. I was tired of being the only one who carried my lunch to school every day. I was tired of this, da-da-da. And, of course, every kid's nightmare. I mean, she was gracious about it. She said, look, if you had just told me that, I would have worked out a way that you could have done that. But you didn't tell me this. Now, do you know what has happened? I'm like, what? And I've heard the words come out of my mouth to my children, but she proceeded to give me a lesson on broken trust.
Oh, gosh.
I know. And it was like, Now, was it this horrible, like she beat me? And no, it wasn't. But it was just realizing what I had done.
Yeah. Her words are weighted. So, like, her saying that, it's like, oh, my gosh.
It was like, I'm so sorry, Mom. So... yeah, that was probably the most trouble I got. Now, I did other things. I will say this. I did other things. I was the good kid, but like my one, it didn't work for me. I knew I'd be caught. Like my one friend that I was like, you know what, this is it. I'm gonna be a bad kid. I'm gonna go do this stuff, right? So I went and spent the night with her one night, and she had this guy that she liked, so her parents were way older and they couldn't hear anything.
Oh,
so
gosh.
she's like, let's sneak out of the house. And I'm like, I don't even know if my mother knows maybe she knows this now. I don't know. Anyway, so I was like, okay. And like, I'm so naive. I know nothing, right? And we sneak out of the house, and this guy is like down the street waiting with some friends of his, and we're in the car just driving all over the place at 11 o'clock at night. And I'm like, thank God we didn't get into any kind of an accident or anything. So that was Friday night. So I spent the night, right? So the next day she's like, we should go to the mall. And I'm like, okay, yeah, let's go to the mall. That sounds fun. Somewhere in there, like I wasn't allowed to wear makeup. She had put makeup all over my face. We had gone to a basketball game, and one of the coaches looks at me and he goes, Bridgett Michelle, does your daddy know you're wearing all that makeup? And I'm like, no, sir. He says, well, you better go wipe it off before I tell him. But so the next day, that Saturday, she's like, we should go to the mall. And I'm like, okay. The only money she spent was a quarter for one of those big bags, the big brown bag. And as we walked through the equivalent of like Dillard's, she began to put things in that bag. Oh my God. And I remember just feeling sick at my stomach the whole time. Like, oh gosh, we're going to get caught. We're going to get caught. Yeah. What is she doing? And I would love to say that I told on her. No, I did not. Because at that point I was mortified. I thought, I'm going to jail. I am going to jail. Here I am, bad girl. This is the only thing I've ever tried, and I am going to jail. So, yeah, that was the last time I hung out with her.
Yeah.
It's all it took.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
Don't need to do that.
This life is not for me.
No, I can't do it. I can't do it.
So did your driver ever get the $20 back?
She did. My mom gave her. My mom, obviously paid her because that was the agreement between them. And I apologized to her.
Did you have to work it off?
I had to go eat crow. I'm trying to think of what she did. I think just knowing that like there was this trust issue between us at that point, I think it was just the guilt of that was enough. I don't really remember my mom making me, do anything hefty. We already did work around the house, so it wasn't like, she didn't add to that workload at all.
Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah, those verbal spankings are sometimes the worst spankings. I don't like them at all.
No. It's like, oh.
Mm-hmm.
There are certain key phrases like, well, you've broken my trust. It's like, ugh.
No.
Not that, anything but that, Mom.
Yeah. Well, we have come to the end of our interview. Is there any last words of wisdom you'd like to give to our audience today?
Well, we started kind of everything off talking about maternal guilt, didn't we? Mm-hmm. How maternal guilt is a real thing. Maternal guilt really is a real thing. It starts from the moment you find out you're pregnant and you're like, man, I took that medicine and I didn't even know I was pregnant, right? Yeah. So it's like it starts way early and there's enough of it to go around. So cut yourself some slack. It's easy sometimes to have grace and mercy for other people.
Oh, yeah.
But sometimes we need to ask God to help us to have grace and mercy for ourselves and not to be so hard on ourselves. We make decisions most of the time, because I can tell you I didn't always follow this rule, but that was before Jesus. Most of the time we make our decisions the best we know how with the information we have at the time. Mm-hmm. And hindsight is always 20/20. Mm-hmm. But cut yourself some slack, and just realize that, you're going to make enough decisions, enough things that just naturally happen. There's enough maternal guilt to go around. Don't add to your own maternal guilt. And realize that your kids really are, they're so gracious and merciful. There's a lot that they forgive and they forget, or that you catch that they never even knew of, that they don't even catch. That they're like, what are you talking about, Mom?
Yeah.
And I think that would be one thing. I would also say don't be so caught up in, what you can't give to your children and the materialistic things, but realize that the things that will last with them, like that Christmas with Katie, like I can't tell you any of the presents that came out from under that tree, but, the things that they're going to remember are the memories. They're going to remember those things and the time spent and the effort given more than they're going to remember what was wrapped under. Ask me now, I'm 52 years old. I cannot tell you. Like, I can only really think of maybe 2 presents I ever got for Christmas as a kid. But the things I do remember, is just chilling with my family. My sisters and I, we used to have dance parties, and we'd get the 8-track go in and have dance parties in the family room, listening to the stereo with my dad. It's those kind of things that, so don't, realize that those things hold more value than anything monetarily you could ever give.
Yeah. So good. Well, thanks so much for being on our podcast today. I appreciate
Thank you. You're welcome. I love you.
Love you too. Well, that's all we have for this episode. Be sure to tune in next week for more Words from Your Mama.